Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we meet again on the Islamic Notes channel, a place where we together revive Islamic values through stories full of wisdom and valuable lessons. In every story that we will convey, there is a deep message that can be an inspiration and strengthen faith in living our daily lives. These stories teach us to always be patient in facing trials, steadfast in goodness, and always remember Allah in every step. Hopefully, these stories can be an encouragement and reminder that in every test, there is hidden grace and wisdom. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell button so you don't miss the meaningful Islamic stories that we will share regularly. Your support means a lot to us to continue to present useful and inspiring content. Let's start the story. The story of a Japanese scientist who discovered Islam through science. His name is Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, a professor of quantum physics from Kyoto University who has spent more than 25 years of his life researching the universe. He is known as an atheist scientist who is skeptical of all forms of belief. For him, religion is just a mythical system that developed because of human ignorance of the laws of nature. But all that began to change when he got the opportunity to be a visiting researcher at CERN, Switzerland, in the Large Hadron Collider LHC project. There he was involved in research on the origin of particles and how everything could appear from nothingness. One night, after a long research session on the Big Bang theory and vacuum energy, he was pensive in his laboratory. A question that he had been avoiding suddenly arose in his heart. Why is all this so orderly? Who laid down these laws so precisely? Did it all happen by chance? He began reading philosophical and spiritual literature from various religions. But one thing that continued to attract his attention was the Quran. He stumbled upon it by chance while reading a scientific passage that mentioned that the Muslim holy book had mentioned the expansion of the universe, the creation of water, and the origin of man from clay. Something that, to his scientific eye, seemed shocking. He read the verse, "And the heaven we have built with might, and verily we are its expander." QS Az-Zariyat 47. His heart was shaken. He felt this verse like a bolt of lightning striking his logic. How could a 7th century book state the expansion of the universe? A discovery that was only understood in the 20th century. Dr. Tanaka's search deepened. He bought translations of the Quran in Japanese and English. He also read commentaries and watched lectures by Muslim scientists such as Dr. Zaghloul El-Nagar and Harun Yahya. The more he read, the more he felt that the science he had loved all this time did not contradict revelation. In fact, it was as if the Quran was a door that opened a deeper understanding of reality. However, what touched him the most was Al-Ikhlas's letter. Say, He is the Almighty Allah. Allah is the one from whom everything is asked. He neither begets nor is begotten, and there is nothing equal to him. Al-Ikhlas 1-4. The simplicity of the verse calmed his soul. There is no concept of the Trinity, no gods. There is only one Almighty God, who does not resemble creatures, but is near in all matters. A concept that is very logical, clean, and in line with scientific principles, which always demand clarity and order. Finally, in the silence of the university library, where he usually read, he recited 2 sentences of the Shahada. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Her tears flowed, not because he felt defeated as a scientist, but because he felt he had found the truth he had been looking for. Not in a laboratory, not in a formula, but in the light of guidance from the sky. Today, Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka is known as Harun Tanaka. He remains a scientist, but he now tells his students that knowledge is the path to faith, and that the universe is not the result of chance, but the great work of the all-wise Creator. He is now often invited to various international forums to speak on science and Tawhid. In each of his lectures, he always repeats one sentence. Science leads me to understand nature, but Islam leads me to understand the purpose of all that. Dr. Harun Tanaka's conversion to Islam not only changed his beliefs, it also changed his perspective on science, life, and his purpose as a human being. For decades, he felt like his life was like a series of formulas that had no direction. But after learning about Islam, he felt that every element of his life now had meaning. But the path to truth was not without obstacles. In Japan, religion is often considered a private matter that should not be discussed. Society tends to be secular. His colleagues on campus began to treat him coldly. Some even openly called him influenced by foreign ideology or abandoning Japanese cultural roots. He was not angry because he understood. Guidance is a light that does not necessarily reach all eyes. The hardest thing was when his family, who highly upheld Shinto customs, felt betrayed. His mother cried, his brother was angry. They felt that Harun had abandoned his ancestral identity. But Harun did not respond with emotion. He simply said softly, "I am not abandoning you. I am learning to love you in a deeper way, because I now know the God who teaches true love, justice, and boundless compassion." It took years for his family to come to terms with his choice. Slowly they saw that Harun had not become a radical or fanatic, but rather a gentler, more patient, and more grateful person. In the meantime, he began to build a small community of Japanese Muslims in Kyoto. He became a regular speaker at Islamic cultural centers, translated books on science and monotheism into Japanese, and even wrote a book called The Cosmos and the Creator, Reflections of Japanese Scientists on Islam, which became a bestseller among Japanese students and academics. In his book, he wrote, "Many people think that science and faith are at odds, but precisely because I am a scientist, I can no longer deny that there is an extraordinary order in this world, and that order must come from a greater source than mere chance. That is Allah." He also built a bridge of dialogue between Muslim scientists and Japanese scientists. At an international symposium in Tokyo, Harun stood in front of hundreds of scientists from various countries and said, "Science without spiritual direction will only create machines, not meaning. But if science is guided by faith, it can become a ladder to light." One of the most historic moments in his life was when he went to Mecca to perform the Hajj. There, among millions of people from all corners of the world, he wept before the Kaaba. A Japanese man who was taught from childhood that God is a myth and life is just a coincidence, now prostrates himself in emotional silence. He said in his prayer, "O Allah, I come from a far country. My heart is hardened by logic and numbers, but you soften it with your light. Accept me as your servant." Now, Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka is no longer busy just pursuing scientific publications. He is more busy teaching the younger generation of Japan to know that behind galaxies and particles, there is a subtle, all-knowing substance. He kept researching, kept writing journals, but every time he finished reading the results of his observations, he always smiled and whispered, "Subhanallah." Because for him, science is no longer just a tool to understand the world, but also a window to know God. After decades of devoting his life to academics, archaeology, and material science, Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, a prominent Japanese professor, underwent one of the most surprising and meaningful phases in his life. He embraced Islam. This decision did not come suddenly, but was the fruit of a long search, provoking questions and inner experiences that he had kept silent about. After reciting the 2 sentences of the Shahada in simplicity and solemnity in a small mosque in Kyoto, Dr. Tanaka's life slowly changed. Not in the sense that he left his entire past behind. He remained a scientist, a lover of history and civilization, but now he viewed the world through a new lens, the lens of monotheism. One thing that changed most noticeably was the rhythm of his life. If in the past time was merely a matter of hours between research projects and lectures, now time has become a sacred space to draw closer to Allah. 5 times a day he stands in prayer, realizing his smallness in front of the Creator. For him, prayer is not just a ritual, but a moment of purification of the soul, a silent dialogue between a servant and his Lord. He began filling his library not only with scientific journals and history books, but also with interpretations of the Quran, the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad, and classical Sufism books. He was very impressed by the teachings of Imam al-Ghazali, especially about the balance between outer and inner knowledge. Knowledge is not only to know, but to know Allah, he wrote in a diary that would later become part of his memoirs. Dr. Tanaka also became a warm figure in the Muslim community in Japan. Although he felt awkward at first, he slowly became a role model. He gave lectures on the contributions of Islamic civilization to science, from mathematics to astronomy, from medicine to philosophy. He showed that faith and knowledge are not two opposing poles, but two wings that strengthen each other. One of the most moving experiences was when he first went on the pilgrimage to Mecca. Amidst millions of people from all over the world, Dr. Tanaka cried. He felt as if he had returned to the starting point of life, where all worldly status disappeared, and all that remained was the relationship between a servant and his Lord. He wrote, "Before the Kaaba, I am no longer a professor, no longer an archaeologist, no longer a Japanese. I am simply a servant, like Adam returning to his origin." After returning from the Hajj, he no longer wanted to be known as Professor Tanaka, who converted to Islam, but as Abdullah Hiroshi Tanaka, a servant of Allah who continues to learn to be better. He wrote many articles on the integration of Islamic spirituality and modern science. For him, Islam is not just a religion, but a way of life that brings peace and meaning. Now, in his twilight years, Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka spends much of his time meditating, reading the Quran, and mentoring young students who want to study the relationship between Eastern culture and Islamic civilization. He is a bridge not only between East and West, but between the past and the future, between reason and faith. When asked what made him steadfast in Islam, he answered simply, "Because only Islam teaches that all knowledge leads to one essence, to know and love the one God." One of the things that Dr. Tanaka felt most after converting to Islam was the presence of a sense of peace that could not be explained by any formula or theory. He was used to analyzing the world through logic and observation, but now he began to delve into the inner side of humans that he had only touched briefly. He realized that he had been very intellectually rich all this time, but there was an emptiness that could never be filled by knowledge alone. He began to get used to waking up in the last third of the night to perform tahajjud. In the silence and darkness of the winter night in Kyoto, he stood looking at the Qibla, crying silently. Every prostration was a release of burden. Every prayer was a request that came from the depths of his soul. "When the world is asleep, I feel closest to Allah," he wrote in a personal journal that was later translated and distributed to various Muslim communities in Japan. Surprisingly, Islam did not make Dr. Tanaka feel like he had lost his Japanese identity. On the contrary, he found that Islamic values were very close to Japanese culture: discipline, simplicity, respect for others, and a sense of responsibility. He often said that Islam did not erase his culture, but rather purified it. He continued to eat in the Japanese way, wear a kimono at formal events, and observe the manners of a traditional Japanese. But now all of this was considered an act of worship. He also began writing a new book, titled Light from the East, The Spiritual Journey of a Japanese Scientist. In it, he recounted how the verses of the Quran had awakened his purest awe of the universe. He discussed verses about the creation of the heavens, the rotation of the earth, rain and marine life, and compared them to modern scientific findings. But more important than the compatibility of science and verses was the realization that all knowledge is ultimately a window to the greatness of God. The book was well received not only among Muslims, but also among non-Muslim academics in Japan. Many were inspired by the honesty and depth of spirituality in his writings. Several students even admitted that they had begun to open themselves to studying Islam more seriously after reading the book. A hope he had never expected before, that he would become a wasila, intermediary, of guidance for others. One day at an interfaith seminar in Tokyo, Dr. Tanaka delivered a speech that touched the hearts of many people. In his soft and wise Japanese, he said, "I used to study ancient civilizations to find out who we really are. Now I know that whoever we are, whatever nation we come from, we are all servants of one God. And when we return to that nature, our hearts become calm." Now, every time he stands in front of the class, he not only delivers historical or archaeological theories, but also inserts values of faith without forcing it. He guides his students to not only see artifacts as inanimate objects, but as silent witnesses of a civilization that once probably knew God better than we do now. In his modest home, not far from the foot of Mount Hiei, he built a small library that is open to the public. He named the place Dar al-Hikmah Kyoto, the House of Wisdom. There, young people come to study, discuss, or just sit quietly reading interpretations and history. He welcomes anyone with a smile, Muslims and non-Muslims, young and old. He believes that the best dawah is by example. To this day, Dr. Tanaka, or now better known as Ustaz Hiroshi by the Japanese Muslim community, continues to write, teach, and reflect. He never considers himself finished searching. For him, Islam is an ocean that can never be explored. He said, "Every day I learn to know Allah, and every time I feel like I know Him, I feel smaller, and I want to prostrate myself even more." His journey is not over, but one thing is for sure, since the day he said the Shahada, his life is no longer empty. Now in every breath, every step, and every beat of his heart, he only wants one thing, to be a servant who is loved by his Lord. Entering the age of 75, Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka's body is no longer as strong as before. His steps slow down, his hands begin to tremble when writing, and his eyes are no longer as sharp as when he was still studying ancient manuscripts or measuring archaeological reliefs. However, his soul is actually getting more alive, sharper. There is an inner strength that grows and takes root in him, a strength that can only be born from faith, serenity, and complete surrender to God's destiny. In his old age, Abdullah Hiroshi Tanaka has become a spiritual reference, not only for the Japanese Muslim community, but also for many truth seekers from all over the world. People from Europe, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East come to him simply to discuss, ask questions, or just listen to stories of wisdom from a scientist who has found the deepest meaning in his life. He no longer appears very often at academic seminars, but invitations to speak never stop coming. However, he is more selective, only attending forums that combine science and faith. On a visit to Istanbul, he spoke in front of young Muslim scientists from various countries. In a soft and touching voice, he said, "I used to think that truth was the result of an intellectual search alone. But after I got to know Islam, I understood that truth is a light given by Allah to anyone who sincerely seeks it, even though the path is long, full of wounds, and sometimes lonely." Among the most moving moments was when he had the opportunity to visit Indonesia, a country he had long wanted to visit since his youth. He visited Borobudur, a temple he had only learned about from journals and archaeological photographs. Now he stood alone there, gazing at the silence of the stones that held thousands of years of history. But what was even more touching was when he visited a small Islamic boarding school in East Java. The students welcomed him warmly. In front of them, he did not talk about theory or history, but about life. He cried when he saw the little children memorizing the Quran with great enthusiasm. In his heart, he said, "How pure their souls are. They are the future of Islam, the light that will protect the world from the darkness of meaning." While in Indonesia, he also wrote a spiritual travelogue. In one section, he wrote, "This world is like a living museum. Every place, every person is a spiritual artifact. Our task is not just to look at it, but to reflect on it, and to love the owner of it all." After returning to Japan, Abdullah Hiroshi increased his time for khalwat, solitude, and muraqabah, watching over the heart. He made it a habit to read Surah Yasin every morning and Surah Al-Mulk before going to bed. He once said that among all the verses in the Quran, the verse that most often made him cry was, "Allahu nuru as-samawati wal-ard." Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. QS An-Nur 35. For Dr. Tanaka, Islam was not the end of the search, but the beginning of the journey home, returning to nature, to the truth that so far may not have been explained, but could be felt. He realized that all the questions he had collected throughout his life were slowly beginning to find answers, not in the form of a definition or theory, but in the form of peace of mind. He is not afraid of death. He considered death as the door to true life. In a will he wrote himself and kept by his close friend, he wrote, "If one day I leave, don't cry over my broken body. Cry over the time we didn't use to know Allah. I left not because my life was finished, but because my God called me home. Thank God I already know the way home. In his final moments, he still asked to listen to the recitation of the Quran. He really likes reading Surah Ar-Rahman and Al-Fajr. And finally, on a quiet morning in the month of Ramadan, in a state of ablution and surrounded by his students reciting dhikr and prayers, Dr. Abdullah Hiroshi Tanaka breathed his last breath.